Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our annual Distinguished Lecture of the Pat Brown Institute. My name is Rafe Sonnenschein. I'm the Executive Director of the Pat Brown Institute for Public Affairs, very proudly located at the campus of Cal State, LA. The Pat Brown Institute was placed on our campus in 1987 by Governor Pat Brown, who had left office 20 years before, and was looking for a campus at which his vision about opportunity for young people through higher education could best be realized. And we were honored then, and are honored now, that he picked Cal State LA to represent the entire mission in his mind of upward mobility and opportunity for the young people of California. And as we all know, if it were not for Pat Brown, our higher education system would not be the model that it is today, even with all the troubles it's experienced. Everybody knows that Pat Brown's vision was really and truly carried out. And we're honored always that the Pat Brown Institute has been considered a vehicle for Pat Brown's legacy. Some of you have had the opportunity to see the wonderful movie about Pat Brown, done by his granddaughter, Sasha Rice, who is sitting right here. Sasha is a member of the Board of Advisors of the Pat Brown Institute, and some of the leadership of the Pat Brown Institute is here, including our chair of the Board of Advisors, our provost, Dr. Lynn Mahoney. You're welcome to here. Starting many years ago, more than 20 years ago, the Pat Brown Institute began a program called the Distinguished Lecture. The first one was in 1994, and it was delivered by a very distinguished individual who then was with the Hilton Corporation named James Galbraith. He actually sent me an email when I told him about this event, and he said, guess who was the first distinguished lecturer of the Pat Brown Institute? And we looked it up, and guess who? It was Jim Galbraith. He continues to be a member of our Board of Advisors as an emeritus member and a very active member. But interestingly enough, the second speaker in the history of this program was a fellow who then was serving as California State Librarian named Kevin Starr. 20 years ago this year, Kevin Starr was the second distinguished lecturer of the Pat Brown Institute, and his topic will not surprise you back then: the evolving dream, California in the next millennium. And who could know more about that than Professor Kevin Starr? So to us, it is an altogether wonderful circle of the history of the Pat Brown Institute that 20 years after he became the second distinguished lecturer for the Pat Brown Institute, that he will be delivering the 2015 distinguished lecture for this institute. So we'll have more opportunities to hear about Professor Starr momentarily. I'd like to thank a few people before we go into our program and tell you a little bit about our program tonight. We have plenty of time. We're going to have plenty of time to hear from Professor Starr. There'll be plenty of time for a Q&A with Professor Starr. And I know a number of you have already had an opportunity to chat with him and to speak with each other coming in. We have a number of special guests with us tonight. I don't know if he's here yet, but I know that Supervisor Mark Ridley-Thomas is coming. Mark, are you here yet? I think he's possibly caught in traffic, which I think some of you may have experienced today. We also have Renee Martinez, President of the Board of Los Angeles City College. We have Mike Fong, who's a member of the Board of Trustees for the LA Community College District. Joy Pikus, former member of the Los Angeles City Council. I have noticed that it is difficult to mention Joy Pikus' name without a round of applause coming up. There's Joy right there. We also have a number of other distinguished people: Ed Avila, President of the LA Project Restore; Ken Bernstein of the Office of Historic Resources for the City of LA; Jonathan Yang of Mayor Garcetti's office; Joel Bellman, Media Relations Deputy for LA County Supervisor Sheila Kuehl, and a source of total sadness for everybody in Los Angeles that he has announced his retirement from the County of Los Angeles. That's Joel. Nicole Jones from State Controller Betty Yee's office. And we also have some distinguished people from our own university. We have Janet Dial, the Vice President of University Advancement. We have Mario Perez, Associate Vice President. And we have a few other people you might want to know. Bob Stern, one of the leading reformers in the city of Los Angeles. Lynn Goldfarb, who's the movie maker who just has been broadcasting the wonderful movie about Mayor Tom Bradley that some of you may have seen, is here. And is continuing that movie to be shown around. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, our ongoing sponsors, who include Wells Fargo, Edison and Edison International, and also the California Wellness Foundation. Of those, Wells Fargo has three people in the room this evening, and that's Roy Hasso, Vivian Pham, and Marcia Chu. And thank you all for being here tonight. And Vivian was an excellent student in my political science class at Cal State Fullerton many years ago. So she did really well, and she's continuing to do very well. I'd also like to thank the staff of the Pat Brown Institute. People always think we have 10 or 15 people on staff. There's about 5 or 6 of us. They're all here tonight, and they don't like always to be recognized, but everything that went on tonight was the result of the work of our staff and volunteers, and I think they should all be thanked. In addition, one of our high school leadership students, Esmeralda Garcia, is here from our youth program, and she was signing in people at the front and attends basically and participates in all of our events. We also have a large number of our students here from the Honors College at Cal State LA. Would you all stand up, those of you who are Honors College students? And from what we are told, they have been reading Professor Starr's work in their classes, led by their professor who, where are you? His name, I'm telling you this is his name, is Chris Rock. He has offered to come up and do a bit of a stand-up routine after Professor Starr speaks, but I told him that would not be required this evening. We thought we might be able to get by without it, but thank you so much for bringing them. I'd also like to introduce one other person with a very close partnership with the Pat Brown Institute. Martha Sklar is the former co-president of the League of Women Voters of Los Angeles. Right over here, Martha, to be recognized. And as there are so many things we do together with the League of Women Voters, including our program of political debates, I wanted to let you know that they're having a very special event on Sunday, November 8th at UCLA and in Westwood, which is going to celebrate their 95th anniversary. And it will include a showing of what appears to be a wonderful movie called Suffragette. If any of you have seen any of the trailer for that, it looks really quite remarkable. So there are flyers for this program out front, and we urge you to take the opportunity to enjoy it. Before I introduce the president of our university, I would like to briefly tell you how the evening will go, which is the president will introduce Kathleen Brown, who will introduce Kevin Starr. He will speak as long as he feels like speaking. I've never heard anybody say, gee, I wish that had been shorter. Everybody wants to hear more from Kevin Starr. And when he's done, we'll have time for Q&A. I'll come up and assist with just making sure people say things that have a question mark at the end. Sometimes people confuse speeches with questions, but it's a great opportunity to hear from him. We'll probably wrap up about 8:45, and then we have a presentation for Professor Starr at that point. So it's my great pleasure now to introduce, I guess I can no longer call him our new president at Cal State LA. President Bill Covino has been with us, while in one sense a short time, but so much has gotten accomplished in that time that it seems like it must have been a much longer time. Among the things that he's done for our university is greatly enhance our community engagement and to say again and again that we are LA's university. And he'll talk a little bit about that, but maybe it's easier for me to say what he's brought to this, in a sense of energy and connection that has been wonderful for our campus, and we hope is wonderful for the community, and has certainly been wonderful for the Pat Brown Institute. So it's a great pleasure and honor on my part to introduce the president of Cal State LA, President Bill Covino.
Good evening. Great to have you all here. You look wonderful. I'm especially glad to have our honor students here. There'll be a quiz. A special welcome to our distinguished lecturer, Kevin Starr, who is just a delight in every way, and to all the distinguished guests that we have here tonight. I mean, this event exemplifies what value Cal State LA places on community engagement. Our newest center at Cal State LA is the Center for Engagement, Service, and the Public Good, and that's one of the ways in which we're branding the university. We recognize that all universities have a responsibility to look outward beyond the confines of campus, and we feel that as Los Angeles's premier comprehensive university, comprehensive public university, that our students, faculty, and staff have a special responsibility, and we're very proud to serve Los Angeles, greater Los Angeles, and the region and the state. And the Pat Brown Institute, of course, is an invaluable part of our community engagement. They are very, very much, to say engaged, to say they're engaged is an understatement, I realize. Whether hosting a vigorous debate on the expansion of the 710 freeway, I think that debate went on until about 3 in the morning, or hosting a film and panel, as we did several weeks back, examining the legacy of the legendary Mayor Tom Bradley, or just last week, having a wonderful forum featuring Sasha Rice's film at Cal State Dominguez Hills on Watts then and now. The Pat Brown Institute really encourages the intellectual dialogue that we'll enjoy tonight, and that is crucial for our city, crucial for the region, certainly crucial to the future. In January 2016, I want to point a little bit here to the new logo. This is the new logo for Cal State LA. It was unveiled on September 21st, so this is really very new. Those of you on this side who can't see it quite because of the podium will want to take some extra time later to stand and look at it. But the logo is a cityscape, the iconic buildings of LA. And to complement this logo and what it represents for us, we're going to open a new campus in downtown Los Angeles at 8th and Grand in January. And at that campus, the Pat Brown Institute, in association with Mayor Garcetti, will be offering the Civic University. This is our 3rd year, isn't it, Ray, offering the Civic University? The Civic University is our effort to bring in what have become hundreds of aspiring civic leaders who we help to understand how to negotiate government, how to acquire voices, how to make arguments, and how to be effective representatives. And it's very exciting and sometimes very amusing and energizing. Mayor Garcetti and I have both been in these sessions, and we've been very impressed. So the Civic University will take residence at the downtown campus of Cal State LA, along with a number of other courses that offer an opportunity for downtown residents to enhance their lives, further their careers through new courses, new certificates, new degrees, the completion of degrees. We have degree completion programs for those who got caught up in something else and just have a few more courses to take. So this, I think this is just one example of many examples Cal State LA, as we put it, pushing boundaries, exceeding expectations. Our students exceed expectations. Our faculty exceed expectations, and we continue to aspire to exceed expectations on every front. And we hope that the downtown campus will be part of that enterprise. Serving the public good is a value that Cal State LA shares with the Brown family, whose contributions are, of course, immeasurable. Since 1987, when the Pat Brown Institute came to Cal State LA, we have shared a great relationship with the Brown family, and we are so very, very grateful for all of your support along the way. It's been terrific. We're proud to be the home of the Pat Brown Institute, and I am proud and pleased and honored to be able to introduce to you the former treasurer of the state of California and a great, great friend of the Pat Brown Institute, Kathleen Brown.
Thank you, President Reno. It's my pleasure to be here and to support this great institute, which my father was so proud of, and quite thrilled that it came to this university. So you are carrying the torch, and the family certainly appreciates it, and my father does too. My pleasure tonight is to introduce your distinguished speaker, Kevin Starr. In fact, one of the joys of having a lunch or dinner with Kevin Starr is later recalling not just the occasion, but the fabulous range of topics he so casually introduces into conversation. Beyond the normal range of lunch table chatter, Kevin can ricochet around a celebration of St. Benedict's rules of monastic life, why Frank Norris's novel, The Octopus, is the most compelling of California fiction, the role of longshoreman Harry Bridges in the history of California unionism, the blurring of entertainment with governance in our political life, and the best cigars now available from Cuba, not to mention the charm of the Golden Mirror restaurant out in the San Francisco avenues. And that is before the entree arrives. Kevin is a California treasure. First of all, he has written with magisterial authority and a deep appreciation of drama and personality the history of California. His 8-volume seminal history, California Americans and the California Dream, is of unique and lasting consequence. And the good thing about his books is not just their insight and accuracy, but their readability. As Kevin likes to say, I tend to see myself as a nonfiction writer who, among other things, writes about history. Kevin is a 4th-generation Californian. His youth was not simple or pampered. As a young boy, he lived in an orphanage and in public housing. But his grandmother, the widow of a firefighter, brought order and purpose to his life. He graduated from the University of San Francisco and took his master's and PhD at Harvard. He was the state librarian of California and now holds a distinguished position as professor of history at USC. I should note that Kevin and the Brown family have something unique in common. His grandfather, the firefighter, and my grandfather, a policeman, were among the gallant and self-serving public servants who labored side by side to maintain safety and order in San Francisco after the 1906 earthquake. Kevin is not a Pollyannish historian, nor is he given to gloom. He celebrates California history, the social innovation and institutions, the university system, the digital revolution, the remarkable infrastructure, the creativity of the people in all the artistic disciplines. But he notes the downsides, the social and political failures that have brought anguish to people while retarding our growth and well-being. And that's why he is such a perfect speaker for our gathering tonight. Pat Brown and the institute he founded seek a reality in studying our state, We champion our government's achievements and seek to portray ways that it can perform better, indeed with greater insight and compassion and justice. Kevin was a dear friend of Pat Brown and our family, and my husband and I cherish the time we spend with Kevin and his wonderful wife, Sheila. They enhance every room they enter. Kevin, welcome to the Pat Brown Institute.
I'd like to start, just before I start my talk, to talk to the honor students for half a second, with the permission of Chris Rock, their distinguished teacher, and to say that I'm going to give you the sort of theoretical structure. It's not very deep, but I want to do it ahead of time. I'm using the concept of narrative. Okay, these are terms in your responsible writing that you have experience of, the narrative, and the relationship of narrative to identity, and the question of what happens if narrative is not particularly clear, how one has to assemble one's identity. And so the question of narrative, then I list under the rubric of the heading of modernism and the lack of narrative and the necessity of creating a narrative, I put under the rubric of postmodernism. One could use other words. I could have used the words I use now. If I had known I was going to have a class in responsible writing, I would have keyed it a little differently. So, but if that's okay, those are the structures that I'll be working with tonight. And it's a privilege to have you all in my class, and thank you, Mr. Rock, for bringing them here. Now, there are many perspectives one can have regarding the late great Edmund G. Pat Brown, Jr. My own perspective was that in his retirement years, he and I used to camp out together in the forest in the summer and spend many wonderful time with conversations around the fire, and so that I had a sense of considering Pat Brown in and of himself as perhaps the most likable governor in the history of California. Although I'll also, in order to be ecumenical, say Romaldo Pacheco was also a very likable governor. If one puts Pat Brown into an earlier political context, the fact that he began his career, came of age as a progressive Republican, is also of significance. Now, this is progressive with a capital P, as in early 19th century, early 20th century progressivism, which was both in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And I'm going to shock you to say that San Francisco at this time was an almost overwhelmingly Republican city. Things have changed. While this tradition of progressive republicanism had peaked by the time Pat Brown became district attorney in San Francisco in the 1940s, it was especially available to him during his teenage years at Lowell High School, later on as a practicing attorney. Lowell High School, of course, was founded in 1855. Boys High School and Girls High School was the first high school for girls on the Pacific Coast. In the 90s, it merged as Lowell High School, and it was an academy-type school with a very devoted faculty and a very solid progressive ambiance and point of view for the students in terms of reform and social involvement. From progressivism in its Republican mode, which is to say its predominant San Francisco mode at that time, Pat Brown absorbed a taste for clean and efficient government and a strong, very strong orientation towards public works. Progressives favored public works over any other type of activity by government. From this perspective, he was developing along the lines of his fellow Californians, Herbert Hoover and Earl Warren. Herbert Hoover, a consummate civil engineer who built railroads and mines in China and Australia, assembled the Colorado River Compact in the early 1920s, leading to the construction of the dam that now bears his name, and organized the Federal Communications Commission and the Civil Aeronautics Administration, while serving in the 1920s as Secretary of Commerce. And of course, Governor Earl Warren, later Chief Justice Warren, with whom Pat Brown used to commute back and forth, Republican and Democrat. They'd commute up from the Bay Area to Sacramento and return. Think of those wonderful days of ironic ecumenical dialogue between parties. And while Pat Brown was a lawyer by training, not an engineer, progressivism had helped instill in him a belief that one of the primary responsibilities of the elected executive was public works, or some related form of institutional and or organizational creation. Thus, the lingering influence of progressivism, which was also helping to form Earl Warren across the bay in Alameda, linked Pat Brown to a triumvirate of governors. Hiram Johnson, another San Franciscan, Earl Warren from Alameda, and Pat Brown, who in one way or another bear responsibility for the statewide creation by state government of California as a nation state. Hiram Johnson reformed government. Earl Warren saw to the passage of certain necessary laws and initiated some projects, and Pat Brown built, laying down the infrastructure of California as a global nation state. This is the way he's most remembered today, and of course his reputation has soared to the point where he wins many evaluations as the greatest governor we've had. Sometimes he ties with Earl Warren and Hiram Johnson, sometimes the three of them all together, but many times Pat Brown is out in front. This is the way he's remembered as a builder, but this constructionist drive in him is rarely attributed to, in part, his early career as a progressive Republican at a time when the Republican Party, while woefully behind the Democratic Party at registration, dominated state government through the administration of Goodwin J. Knight in the mid-1950s. Now, I'm fully aware that when we seek to brand a great elected official like Pat Brown, we must never seek to draw equal signs between him and the outside influences which shaped him. Yet every successful elected official operates in a social and cultural context that can be immediate, post-earthquake San Francisco in Pat Brown's case, and Lowell High School, regional or statewide, the persistent progressivism legacy that lasted in one form or another until United States Senator Hiram Johnson's death in 1945, or national and international. In Pat Brown's case, his leadership in California of a national epic, nationally significant epic of construction during the years he was governor, an epic in which California more than played its part. If we link this work of Pat Brown to the rebuilding of war-ravaged Europe with the assistance of the Marshall Plan, we can give an international dimension to these influences as experienced in succession by Earl Warren, who launched freeway construction, Goodwin J. Knight, who finished a number of projects, including bridges, the Senator Feld Bridge that Warren left incomplete when he was named to the Supreme Court, and Pat Brown, who completed just about every project on the books, to include a statewide water plan, 20 years in the making. I traced that in one of my books going back to the first write-up of this water plan in the late 30s. 20 years in the making, a dramatically expanded state park system, and a response through construction to the California Master Plan for Higher Education that created California as a higher educational utopia. Tonight, fully realizing that Pat Brown needs little context beyond his own talents and ambitions, as well as the energy from the dynamic family that he came from and the dynamic family he and his wife formed together. His own talents and ambitions, as well as the needs of post-war California, along with its global future, to put Pat Brown into context, I would like to suggest that Pat Brown, so unpretentious, so highly contextualized by his San Francisco origins, a brilliant man, but not a formal intellectual, a visionary, rather, with a visual commitment to implementing his vision, a visual commitment to implementing his vision, especially when it came to water, that this same governor can be put in the context of reforming modernism, and his son and successor, Governor Jerry Brown, be subsequently seen in a postmodernist perspective. Now, these are rather highfalutin terms for Pat Brown, who hated pretense of any sort. But I believe as time goes on and more history is written of the Pat Brown era and of Pat Brown, this contextualization of Pat Brown across the state, across the nation, into the post-war recovery period will underscore what I mean. This notion of reforming modernism will help inform the writings of a future historian, now only, I was going to say in the 4th grade, but I think now only taking expository writing from Professor Chris Rock at California State University in Los Angeles. Now, first of all, let me establish some distinctions between modernism and postmodernism. Arising in the early years of the 20th century, modernism peaked at mid-20th century and continued into the 1970s. Its most obvious manifestation was architecture. From this perspective, modernism begins with the secessionist architects of Vienna in the early 1900s, the influence of that school on the architects of Chicago, most notably Frank Lloyd Wright, the rise of the Bauhaus movement in Weimar, Germany, most notably the work of Walter Gropius, and the immigration of the Bauhaus movement, modernist movement to the United States before and after World War II. Take a look at the Seagram building at 375 Park Avenue between 52nd and 53rd in Midtown Manhattan. And you'll see that how Ludwig Mies van der Rohe and others, to include Philip Johnson, designed the lobby, achieved a perfect architectural symbol of the modernist era at its high point. The Seagram building emanates an abstract clarity verging on the purely geometric. I think we'd have to rank it these days alongside the Pat Brown aqueduct, but we'll get to that shortly. Modernism favored what was clear, comprehensive, all-encompassing. Think back to the very name of some of the great companies of the mid-20th century. Many of them still with us. General Motors, General Electric, General Food, General Dynamics, General Mills. By general, these companies meant generic and commanding all aspects of their product. At the same time, here in Hollywood, equally comprehensive studios, MGM, Paramount, Columbia, Warner Brothers, Universal, controlled the process of filmmaking from script to filming to release. Public works in this era, the interstate highway system fostered by President Dwight Eisenhower, the St. Lawrence Seaway come to mind, were like their modernist predecessors, Hoover Dam and the Tennessee Valley Authority, heroic and comprehensive in scale and achievement. This was the era, moreover, that saw the rise of the federal government to unprecedented comprehensive authority, obviously with World War II, cutting across the previous authority of the states in such vital issues as the end of separate but equal educational tracks for minorities, the evolution of national standards for achievement in math and science, and the creation of a national defense research network among American universities that would lead ultimately to the evolution of the internet here in Los Angeles in the early 1960s. In this rise of generic and generalized giganticism, no state participated more grandly or with more visible results than the great state of California. First of all, American California was created by the Constitutional Convention meeting in Colton Hall, Monterey, in the summer of 1849, created as a near abstraction. The delegates knew that there was no chance whatsoever for California as envisioned by New Spain and by Mexico. This included Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, as well as Baja California. No chance whatsoever for such a colossus to come into the United States as one state. Even Texas, which had come into the Union in 1846, had proven a problem in terms of its size. And to this day, Texas reserves the right unilaterally to divide itself into 5 smaller states. Thus, the California desert delegates meeting in Monterey carved out coastal, Sierra Desert, Central Valley, and Modoc Plateau portions of this behemoth, drew an abstract and elegantly angled line through Lake Tahoe, and appropriated the name California for this reduced but still gigantic remnant. To this day, we recognize that if the Pilgrims and Puritans of Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay colonies had landed in Santa Monica Bay instead of Cape Cod and Massachusetts Bay, present-day California, which extends from Maine to Georgia if it were on the East Coast, would be divided into probably 6 states. Indeed, through the 1870s, the state of California exercised its governance most dramatically through its counties, up to and including the awesome power of capital punishment, which was administered locally by the sheriff. I think this is very important. I can ask you students here today to recall, for instance, when you first started to get your height, you sprung up, you were growing by inches every year, and you're way beyond what you feel you needed to be at that time. California was way beyond what it needed to be at that time in 1850. There was nothing like it, not even Texas. It was, and this is an important part of its definition, it was an abstraction placed on the map. The railroad unified California across the last 3 decades of the 19th century. But while the railroad was nominally regulated by the state, it remained a private authority. The first half of the 20th century saw California unify itself even further through a highway system inaugurated by a bond issue in 1911 and by such great public works as the progressive era, as the Los Angeles Aqueduct, the Hetch-Hetchy system, the creation of the Los Angeles Harbor, and the great public works of the 1930s to include the Oakland-San Francisco Bay Bridge and Golden Gate Bridge. It remained the destiny and heroic achievement of Edmund Gerald Pat Brown, 32nd governor of the state, to spar, lead, and preside over the final phases of this creation of California as a unified system, a general California, if you will, completing the unification of California by a freeway construction in partnership with the federal government, a master plan for higher education, envisioning the entire state as a total and integrated higher educational utopia, and finally the passage, just barely, of Proposition 1 in November 1960, setting in motion the creation of a statewide water system whose central aqueduct now bears his name. From this perspective, Pat Brown was a modernist, a reforming modernist, a building modernist, a man of local origins most at home and operating on a statewide level from a statewide perspective. What I can hear you even now asking this question in your mind. Edmund G. Brown, a modernist, a man who spoke with the accent of old-time San Francisco, who never forgot the friends of his youth, never lost touch with a certain style of up-close and personal politics. Indeed, a governor who owned his own charro suit, now on display in the Museum of California in Sacramento, which he would wear proudly in the annual Old Spanish Days Festival in Santa Barbara. Yes, indeed. Pat Brown, the reforming modernist, the building modernist, the governor animated by a coherent philosophy, not only of California government, but California history as well. California history as well, California identity as well. A narrative nurtured in him initially by the progressive era that was still in effect when he was attending the public grammar schools and Lowell High School in San Francisco. The fact is, Pat Brown came of age intellectually at a time when the California story, the California myth, the meaning of California, call it what you will, had attained a coherence supportable in a state of 7 million people by 1940. This was the essential dynamic, I believe, of the reforming modernism of Governor Pat Brown, the conviction, the certainty that Californians understood their state, generally agreed upon its meaning, and generally accepted its reforming and expansionist agenda. This understanding, moreover, existed almost on the subconscious level, if indeed such a subconscious level can be attributed to a population of eventually 9 million, and I believe that it can. How else to understand, for example, the extraordinary epic of public works in California during the Great Depression? We have to bring in the federal government this time, but most of those projects were previously planned by Californians. How else to understand how the Golden Gate Bridge came online in less than 4 years under budget and ahead of schedule? This universalism of assent, as far as public development was concerned, is of course part of a larger American story during these New Deal years. But as Wallace Stegner tells us, California is like the rest of the nation, only more so, and usually ahead of the pack. The progressivism with a capital P that Pat Brown absorbed, especially at Lowell High School, abounded in California patriotism, while at the same time it was animated by a residual sense of reform and civic enhancement left over from the Hiram Johnson era. None of this was overly self-conscious. Yet in San Francisco, it expressed itself in the creation of Civic Center, dominated by the grand progressive classicism of the City Hall, and by the mounting of the Panama Pacific International Exposition in 1915, and by the expressive personality of longtime, some 20 years, Mayor Sonny Jim Rolfe, a progressive Republican of the Hiram Johnson stripe. Marshall McLuhan once observed that once you are aware of your environment, it is no longer your environment. Meaning, I suppose, that one's experience of environment is an experience of a totality from a relatively non-reflective perspective. Yet still we have the example of young Pat Brown at Lowell High School fighting discrimination by fraternities, indeed founding his own non-discriminatory fraternity. We have the example of Pat Brown, district attorney, plunging himself in 1944 into an almost extra-jurisdictional, there were no redevelopment agencies in those days, investigation of the substandard housing of the largely African-American Fillmore district. The fact is, coming of age, Pat Brown absorbed a comprehensive, modernist, if you will, sense of California as place, historical legacy, achievement, and need for reform. Already in the late 19th century, the Grass Valley-born Harvard philosopher Josiah Royce, another Lowell High School graduate, then called Boys High School, in the midst of his more formally philosophical studies, was exploring California as a case study of American character. Another 19th century Californian, Henry George, was studying the land policies and monopolies of California from the same national perspective. A San Francisco bookseller and publisher by the name of Herbert Howe Bancroft had simultaneously assembled a crew of writers to document the history of California as an epic of progress with a capital P. On a more popular basis, the Protestant Anglo-America of that era was in the process of appropriating its own version of the Hispanic past so as to provide American California with a colonial history. Hence the origins, I believe, of Governor Brown's Charro suit. In the first 3 or 4 decades of the 20th century, even more commodious lines of interpretation were laid down. Heroically, Professor Herbert Eugene Bolton of UC Berkeley was laying down the history of California as part of the Spanish borderlands, intersecting with Pacific Basin history. Indeed, Bolton and his students dominated the field of California history through the 1940s. By the time Pat Brown came of age, California had experienced 2 major waves of interpretation, late 19th and early 20th century, that in the case of the Widener Library at Harvard demanded that the California collection have its own designation and be housed separately alongside the Dante collection on the 4th floor of Widener. I often wondered about that when I was using the collection, but I decided that it was a statement that California was either heaven, hell, or purgatory. Take your pick. Now, I'm by no means trying to recast Governor Pat Brown as some kind of contemplative intellectual. He was, however, a most intelligent man, a lawyer and a politician, blessed with a capacity to read what Pope St. John the 23rd would later describe as the signs of the times. And the signs of the times he absorbed involved a comprehensive approach, a modernist approach to California, even when that meant, as in the case of Proposition 1 in November 1960, opposing Northern California's opposition to a statewide water plan. One of his greatest pleasures as governor, Governor Brown once told me, was flying up and down the state in the Grizzly, the official California governor's DC crew. Flights which allowed Pat Brown to enjoy and further corroborate the sense of California as a totality of place, enjoying a totality of identity, enjoying a totality of a usable past. Which, for example, in 1949, had the entire state, north and south, celebrate the gold rush, the centenary of the gold rush, to include gold rush-themed costume events and beard-growing contests. When Pat Brown was serving as Attorney General in the 1950s, he and Governor Earl Warren would commute together from Sacramento to the Bay Area. A Republican turned Democrat, Pat Brown, a Republican Governor, Earl Warren, who in 1946, under cross-filing, won both the Republican and Democratic nominations for governor, would have had to run against himself, I suppose. Each of these men, in short, enjoyed a relatively coherent California narrative anchored in a bipartisan progressivism that could very well be described as membership in the Party of California. Such an attitude can also be ascribed to Governor Goodwin J. Knight here of Los Angeles, the 31st governor of the state, who served between the administrations of Warren and Brown. Now let's reflect for a moment or two on the transition from modernism to postmodernism, as far as California politics are concerned, and we can begin our story with a highly partisan republicanism brought to the governor's race in 1958, when United States Senator William Nolan edged Goodwin J. Knight out of an almost slam-dunk campaign for a full second term and brought to an end this ecumenical modernist era in California politics. Nolan's brand of take-no-prisoners republicanism did not single-handedly end the progressive modernist approach to California, but it did signal the beginnings of a partisan diversification, as evident in the end of cross-filing the very next year, 1959, the same year that Pat Brown began his first term here as governor. Brown's successor, moreover, Ronald Reagan, would be swept into office by forces and points of view more in tune with the dawning postmodernist era, evident in Nolan's ouster of Goodwin J. Knight and San Francisco Mayor George Christopher from their gubernatorial and United States senatorial candidacies. I once asked Governor Brown Sr. At what point did he first encounter challenges in office that signaled to him the end of one era and the beginning of the other? I expected him to go immediately to, say, the Watts Rebellion of 1965, but he said that above all other challenges, the Carroll Chessman case presented him with a conundrum that in retrospect he now believes signaled the end of one era for California, the beginning of the end for one year of California, and the beginning of another. Here was a controversy involving his most awesome powers as governor, the power of commutation. Here was a division of sentiment in California he had never experienced in his political career. In order to begin to understand the postmodernist California as far as politics are concerned, let's fast forward to term 3 and 4 of Governor Jerry Brown. As of the election for term 3, statewide politics had all but disappeared in California. Not just come to an impasse, but become virtually non-existent. In 2010, Republicans who had for decades remained in statewide office, despite falling behind Democrats in registration by as many as 1 million votes, turned to Meg Whitman, the 4th and wealthiest woman in California, a Princeton University and Harvard Business School graduate with a record of accomplishment in the Walt Disney Company, DreamWorks, Procter & Gamble, Hasbro, and eBay. Whitman spent some $144 million of her own fortune on her campaign, which was anchored in a promise to reduce the state workforce, already one of the smallest per population in the country, by up to 40,000 state workers. Here indeed was a case study of the end of traditional politics in California. A campaign anchored in a promise to put state government even further out of business. On the Democratic side was an equally postmodernist situation. There was only one viable candidate for governor, Edmund G. Brown Jr., the 34th governor of the state, who already between 1975 and 1983 pursued a program and appointments as well as a highly orchestrated lifestyle. No governor's mansion, a rented apartment, mattress on the floor, a battered Plymouth from the state carpool, a Sufi choir at his inauguration, a guru advisor, bachelorhood, and a rock star girlfriend. A lifestyle that constituted a surge in the postmodernist state of California politics in terms of its emphasis upon personal choice and branding, no matter how unorthodox. To be fair, however, it must be admitted that the California of the 70s was dramatically in tune with the young governor's stylization and conduct of office. In 1998, the same former governor re-entered elected politics in an equally unprecedented postmodernist manner by courageously standing for mayor of the embattled city of Oakland and facing down the taunting of many in the press who considered such a campaign by a former governor doomed to failure, pathetic even, winning that office, serving in it with distinction, and returning to statewide politics as Attorney General in 2007, serving alongside the equally expressive postmodernist Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, an action hero Republican pledged to non-partisanship. As of 2010, like Meg Whitman, Attorney General Jerry Brown stepped into a vacuum. There was simply no one else available or competitive enough to advance a Democratic candidacy. In the course of this campaign, moreover, Jerry Brown's ratings increased with every sweeping statement he refused to make. Politics were at an impasse, and the voters were in no mood for a Donnybrook for the sake of a Donnybrook. In terms of promises to the voter, Jerry Brown campaigned with an almost abstract absence of political statement, except, of course, that California must either retire its indebtedness, curtail its programs it couldn't pay for, or go bankrupt. Assuming office, Governor Brown had persuaded the voters of California to tax themselves and pay off an outstanding debt, as well as prevent the wholesale dismantlement of public programs and services, the wholesale dismantlement that was the anchor point of Meg Whitman's campaign. In 2004, Governor Brown was reelected to an unprecedented fourth term with an even more dramatic absence of opposition. Indeed, the Republican candidacy for governor that year was conceptualized and marketed as a training exercise for a young, up-and-coming Republican talent. At some point in the 21st century, a postmodernist point of view then prevailed in California politics. Gone with the generic definitions of the state, whether as a matter of historical interpretation or contemporary practice. As governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger refashioned his California as an immigrant's golden dream by the sea, best governed in a nonpartisan manner. As far as Jerry Brown is concerned, while he made references to the California frontier and to the philosophy of loyalty advanced in the late 19th and early 20th centuries by the California-born philosopher Josiah Royce, Governor Jerry Brown, especially in his fourth term, tended to avoid any overt conceptualizing of the California experience and the governorship that served it in favor of a concept of the governorship as managing crisis after crisis, debt and drought especially, on a case-by-case basis. Talking to the governor on the telephone as his third term was coming to a conclusion, I enthusiastically and naively suggested that his campaign for a fourth term would allow him to advance once again some kind of collective California scenario. Although I did not put it that way, I had in mind the kind of constant encouragement that Governor Brown Sr. was famous for. On the other end of the line, there was a long silence. A kind of Jerry Brown silence that struck a chord with me, even though the governor politely ended our conversation. I later read a quote from Governor Jerry Brown: "We don't have problems to be solved. We have conditions to be managed. and we are managing the conditions of our time. That's summarized his postmodernist point of view. I can thoroughly sympathize. I spent nearly 40 years researching and writing topics on the social and cultural history of California. I call it the Americans in the California Dream series. 40 years in the library writing and spending all this effort. And then I read, trying to define California, trying to capture its elusive appeal. Then I read in the, I think it was in the Los Angeles Times, a couple who had left California in the early 90s and moved to Idaho and then had come back to their home. It's in the San Diego area, and had to rebuy a home like their home for much more money. And the reporter said, well, why did you come back to California? Why did you come back to California? And the woman said, well, she said, you can't get good takeout in Idaho. I said, that's it. That's what I've been trying to write about for 40 years, and she just knocks the ball out of the park. In fact, not only did I miss that, which could have explained everything, I was only able to bring the narrative up to 1963, my last volume. I could only handle the 1990s in snippets of some 70+ mini chapters in another book. I realize now that 1963 was the last year I understood and could treat in one volume, because it was part of the synthesis of modernist California, which produced us 1950s people, which became the most populous state in the nation sometime in the early 60s, or the year before, 63 or 64, it's a disputed time. Governor Brown, I think, celebrated in 62, 63. After that, starting with the resistance to the Vietnam War, it became next to impossible to encapsulate the many facts of California in one volume. Where do I put Sonny and Cher? That's why there's such a spectacular array of studies today. You go to the bookstore today, studies of California from so many different angles that start more or less in the almost monogamous 1964 along various topic lines: politics, gardening, architecture, literature, rock music. Plenty of writing about California, but nobody tries to hold it together. And I don't blame them. I recently advised undergraduates seeking to understand California better not to worry about stable explanations and comprehensive definitions, even the ones that you're reading now in my book. In a postmodern era, I advise we encounter California in fragments, and we study it in the fragments we encounter. And like poets and artists, like novelists and short story writers, like script writers and directors, we struggle to make sense of the story in the face of specific phenomena that simultaneously say to us, we mean something. We're trying to tell you something. Pay attention here, you might learn something. While at the same time remaining impenetrable and enigmatic, saying to us, like a quark, we are happening for only an instant. Like quantum mechanics, we elude your efforts at system. Postmodern California is a new world, and you have to find a new approach, and even then you will fall far short of a unified field theory of California. But try for it anyway. Try to experience fragments and perspectives. Try to understand what they mean. Try to integrate them into analysis and narrative. Try to tell the story of California as best you can, and don't be intimidated if you choose a perspective or pathway far off the beaten path. And don't be afraid. Trust your instincts. Trust your experience. Trust the California you are encountering at this all-important time of your life. The California that 50 or 60 years from now may at long last reveal itself to you as being possessed of incipient or residual pattern and meaning. Here's the point of transition then between Governor Brown Sr. and Governor Jerry Brown. It also includes the Watts Rebellion and the Vietnam War. Governor Brown had one modernist agenda, however. Governor Brown has one modernist agenda, the high-speed train, which his father was advocating in 1966 when Highway 10 was under construction. Governor Brown Sr. built a statewide water system. Governor Jerry Brown manages drought. Postmodernism, as I've suggested, is how we cope when narratives are not clearly apparent. when myths and dreams no longer seem so patently true, when California has to be re-earned, re-struggled for. In his recent message signing the assisted suicide bill, for example, Governor Jerry Brown accompanied his signing with a very personal statement about envisioning himself in an end-of-life situation. Energized by modernism, Pat Brown set the stage for our postmodernist era, set the stage for a California that is global, energetic, creative, but a California that eschews generic definitions, that manages to be so many things at once, and most importantly demands that we participate in the process of creating the California of the future, not just through politics, although politics remain very important, but through multiple lines of creativity. In his postmodernist existentialism, his commitment to managing the enterprise on a case-by-case basis without benefit of a commanding narrative, Jerry Brown, term 3 and term 4, is a governor for California so appropriate, so necessary for our times, that one wonders whether or not term 1 and 2 should be considered a youthful prologue to an Arthurian return of a once and future governor from the Avalon of Oakland. When Pat Brown's California lost its way, spent too much money, overextended its resources, became addicted to partisanship, a wiser and chastened Arthur returned to put things right. And yet even Jerry Brown, so minimalist, so existential in his expectations, sustains in his heart one great big Pat Brown dream, a high-speed railroad streaking up and down California and unifying the Golden State with modernist panache. Pat Brown was advocating such a high-speed rail system in his final 2 years of office as part of an integrated statewide transportation system straight from the pages of Ray Bradbury. As long as we are building Interstate Highway 5, he said, and we will be building a statewide aqueduct. That's how he reasoned. Wasn't it just a time to leverage federal and state involvement in the construction of a high-speed rail connection that would run parallel to Interstate Highway 5? By this time, however, such a reforming modernist proposal had little chance surviving the tsunami of anti-government sentiment driving the Ronald Reagan campaign. As it stands today, the high-speed system, which Governor Jerry Brown persistently advocates, constitutes his most dramatic effort at a statewide narrative. To this proposal is also made reference in inaugural and other speeches to Josiah Royce's philosophy of loyalty, anchored in philosophical idealism that constitutes, I believe, along with the economic thought of Henry George, author of Progress and Poverty, 1879, two of the most important ideas to emerge from 19th and early 20th century California. Construction of the high-speed railroad would bring us back to the future, to post-war California, and the epic of construction and program expansion that characterized those years. Even Governor Jerry Brown, we now see, can see the value of a big project connected to a larger narrative. Meanwhile, Californians are assembling and binding together those elements of that future narrative which can be expected to emerge in due course. Just a few years ago, that narrative looked like it would be negative. California, the overextended, the broke, the failed state. But no longer. Jerry Brown and the voters willing to tax themselves back into solvency led us out of that impending wilderness. Could another negative narrative loom on the horizon? I hope not, if even for the time being, state government is forced to remain under one-party rule, which I don't think is that particularly healthy. Drought, a housing crisis, a growing and socially dangerous divide among poor, working poor, a declining middle class, and an intergalactically rich elite. These problems must be addressed. To do all this, politics, the art of the possible, must be restored by a sadder but wiser and rejuvenated Republican Party, not content with its marginalized, naysaying minority status. By 2040, California will have some 50 million residents. What will this California be? A Riviera of global wealth on the coast from San Diego to Marin and poverty inland? California reprising the graduated, integrated ladder of prosperity of the post-war era, with those in poverty through no fault of their own taken care of, and if possible, help to go back to work. Global rankings in science, technology, agriculture, environmentalism, transportation, education, arts and entertainment, sports, public health, all these ventures are forging elements of that narrative that will, in some point in the future, coalesce. And amidst all this is a recovered belief that to be a Californian is part of the privilege, and that California is part of the solution, not the problem. Belief that is in the 21st century version of Pat Brown's California. Reformed, efficient, technologically advanced, diverse and ecumenical, with millions of private narratives flourishing and regional narratives flourishing, and the outlines of an agreed upon and politically brokered statewide narrative once more evident in Sacramento. Thank you so much.